Okay, good afternoon, everyone. If everyone could please be seated, we're going to begin in another moment or so. Everyone should have gotten a copy of the program, right? If anyone did not get them, just raise your hand. Anybody? They're free, right? So, also, the chapel is filling up, and it's great to see so many people. If you don't have a seat, feel free. You might want to sit along the sides. You might want to sit along the steps. Make yourself at home. Just find any spot in the chapel where you would be comfortable. All are welcome. So in a few moments, we will get started with the program.
Shama Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu Kus verakem Aleinu Vekabel berachamim uratzon et Hashkivenu Adonai Eleka, Hashkivenu Eleka Veshuva, Kodesh Aleinu, Aleinu, Kaskekdesh. Al tashlikenu al tashlikenu Shama Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu Kus verakem Alleluia, Alleluia. Vekabel berachamim, berachamim, uratson. Tafilote, lote,
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here today, and I'd like to acknowledge before we get started, there are many people coming in through cyberspace. This event is being streamed, especially to the various Jewish congregations in the area. We have quite a few people who are coming in and are watching this program live. So for those of you out in cyberspace, we'd like to extend a warm word of welcome to you as well. To each and every one of you who are here today, thank you for being here. What we're doing here today, I think, is profound and important. Why is it profound and important? Number one, what we're doing here today has an element of sadness to it. It really does. Really sad. In terms of, we're going to be speaking today about human nature at its very worst. I don't like to talk this way, but it's a reality when we look at the Holocaust. It's overwhelmingly sad, right? And also, we need to underscore this because that kind of violence continues in our society today. And so we're not finished with this work. And that's where the element of sadness comes in. So it's sad. But there's also an element of hope. And the hope is all of you here today. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that we gather as a diverse community. And this is important as we face sadness and violence in our society. What's very important is our solidarity with one another. And this university emphasizes our solidarity, our communion, and our unity with each other, whoever you are and wherever you come from. And that said, I'd like to acknowledge, before we get started, several of our Jewish rabbis and colleagues and their congregants who are with us today. Rabbi Michael Barman here is with us today from Temple Emmanuel in Orange, and a very good friend of the university. Rabbi Herb Brookman, who's also a dear friend of the university, who is from the congregation Mishkan Israel from Hamden, Connecticut. We also have our very own Rabbi Josh Ratner, who is from the local synagogue here in Fairfield, Connecticut. So we're delighted that you're all here. And our very dear friend, who will be introduced in a few moments, Rabbi Abraham Skorka and his wife Sylvia, who are part of the university family. And you do us great honor by being with us today, and know how we greet you with love and affection, and are so delighted of the friendship that we share with you. We also note that we have others of other religious traditions that are here with us as well, from our own staff. We have here our staff from campus ministry, volunteer programs, and multicultural affairs, and that's augmented by people of other traditions. So many of you already know Reverend Sarah, who is from the United Church of Christ in Bridgeport, Imam Ghazi, who is our Islamic chaplain, who is from the Albanian American Muslim community in Waterbury, and our most recent chaplain, Venerable Shimbo, who is from the White Otis Haven of Zen in Connecticut. And also Reverend Danny Schaefer, who is Russian Orthodox, and his cathedral is in New York, and he's on the faculty here. Why do I say all of that? I hope I'm not forgetting anyone. I say all of that because there's something very beautiful that we are so well represented here in this community. And in that sense, this place is very special. We are here together. So it's sad, but it's filled with hope. Why? It's filled with hope because we are here together. Pope Francis said, it only takes one person to restore hope to our world. And each one of you will be that one person. Thank you for being here and for restoring hope to our community.
This is our 10th anniversary of celebrating Kristallnacht at this university. But it is 83 years ago that the night of the broken glass occurred. It was a night of insanity and bigotry. It was a prelude to the final solution where 4 million Jews were murdered. In Elie Wiesel's night, his stand-in character, Leisure, and his father realized that they have survived the first selection at Birkenau. And so he says, and I quote, "Never shall I forget that night, the first night in the camp, which has turned my life into one long night, 7 times cursed and 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the little faces of the children whose bodies I saw turned into wreaths of smoke beneath the silent blue sky. Never shall I forget those flames which consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget that nocturnal silence which deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments which murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams into dust. Never shall I forget these things, even if I am condemned to live as long as God himself. Never." In a world of total moral collapse and indifference, it must never be forgotten. So let us remember that on our journey as ordinary people that we're called righteous, can muster the courage to stand in the face of hatred and bigotry whenever and wherever it surfaces. Words were found after the war written on the wall of a Cologne concentration camp. Please listen with your hearts. You'll hear these words sung in a few moments, and I believe. But close your eyes as I read them, and just think of yourself in a dark, dreary, forsaken place. Because you need to be mindful that these words were read by the young and old on the wall as they were abused and tortured and on their way to their death. And it is written, "I believe in the sun, even when it is not shining. I believe in love, even when I don't feel it. I believe in God, even when God is silent. We must move from the silence of their deaths to the silence of their memories. Let hatred find no place in our hearts, mind, or speech. My friends, let us be courageous enough to be righteous."
Good afternoon, fellow students, administrators, and esteemed guests. My name is Alejandro Ramos, and I would like to warmly welcome you to today's commemoration. Kristallnacht, which literally means Night of Crystal, refers to the broken glass of Jewish homes, synagogues, and shops that lined the streets of cities where anti-Semitic pogroms took place across Germany and Nazi-occupied territories on November 9th, 1938. In the Nazi-sanctioned violence on November 9th, 91 Jews were killed and hundreds more beaten. Thousands of Jewish shops and homes were smashed. More than 1,000 synagogues were burned, vandalized, or completely destroyed. 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps, and more than 1,000 of them later died in those concentration camps. Due to the systematic, thorough, and widespread nature of the violence against Jews that occurred during these attacks, it is now viewed by most scholars as the beginning of what we call today the Holocaust. The systematic persecution and murder of approximately 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. It is an honor to have Rabbi Skorka here with us today. Both during his time in Argentina and now in the US, he has been dedicated to interfaith relationships. We best see this with Rabbi Skorka working with Archbishop of Buenos Aires, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, later Pope Francis, in a series of interreligious talks that were published in a book titled Sobre el cielo y la tierra, on heaven and earth. Today we are gathered to recall the atrocities that occurred in 1938 and for the years following. As a lover of history and someone who is so involved in the political process today, we must never forget what has happened in our past. History has a tendency of repeating itself. I will never forget how I once sat in a class in another institution where we discussed the Holocaust. One of the students raised their hand and said, "Why are we learning about this? This did not happen, and my money should not be going towards paying for this to be taught." I was in utter disbelief that someone would have said that to begin with, but especially in an institution of learning. Let's learn from the past to prevent the future from looking like it. Thank you for being here with us today to help us remember the horrors of years ago. I would now like to invite Imam Ghazi with greetings from the Muslim community, followed by Rabbi Josh with greetings from the Jewish community, who are our university chaplains, to the podium. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful. One of the most horrible events in the human history is Holocaust, a process of dehumanization. And Kristallnacht is the beginning of Holocaust. It's very important to remember and analyze what happened those days, because as my friend mentioned, if we don't learn, history repeats. There are several fatalities during Kristallnacht, and the most important one, in my opinion, is silence. Silence of the neighbors, silence of the friends, silence of the students, silence of religious, silence of politicians, and silence of daily beloved ones. In Islam, there is a concept of the Satan without a tongue, which symbolizes the community's silence towards injustice and violence. Silence deludes, silence hurts, and silence kills. People of faith, people with universal values, shouldn't be silent. They should have something to say about the other suffering. When conscience doesn't speak, the evil starts speaking. The evil becomes brighter. Good people were silent, but the evil ones, they spoke by using the most controversial tool ever, the media. Media was part of Kristallnacht, and propaganda is in every step of Holocaust. Today, media, including social media, can become very ugly in targeting a group of people, certain ideology or religious group. It's important not to be silent during any type of targeting, any type of Kristallnacht, which I think should be part of dictionaries to describe dehumanizing process of targeting. I am proud as an Albanian Muslim, to be part of a community, to come from a country who risked their lives to save Jews during World War II, and the majority of them, they were Muslims. We gave to Jews our Besa, and Besa is a code of honor. Once you are under our protection, once you get Besa from someone, your life is sacred, your faith is sacred, your family is sacred, and your honor is sacred. I think that we should give Besa to all minorities in our country, regardless of their faith, color, and race. We should give Besa to everyone around us. When you feel pain, you are alive, but when you share pain, you are a human. Kristallnacht will not happen again if we don't keep our conscience silent, if we come together, if we restore hope, as Father Tony mentioned, if we keep our beautiful colors and values, if we are united in love, peace, and universal values. Even if evil happens, and it might happen and probably is happening, we should all together speak and stand against this. We pray to God for millions of innocent Jews killed just because of their identity, and we remember them. May God help us speak against injustice, help us removing the destructive prejudices that might drive communities apart. Oh God, forgive us if we give space to hatred of others just because they are different from us. Oh Allah, help us to understand, help us to feel, and stand together with those who are suffering so that love may banish all hatred and good will triumph over evil. May God unite us and direct our prayers and actions towards His love. Amen.
Good afternoon. Baruchim Habaim. Welcome. I'm Josh Ratner. I'm the rabbi at Congregation Bethel in Fairfield and also one of the Interfaith chaplains here, along with Imam Ghazi, Reverend Sarah, and several others. On behalf of the fellow rabbis in attendance here and on behalf of the broader Jewish community, both here and watching virtually online, I want to express my appreciation, my gratitude to Sacred Heart University for putting together this incredible program this afternoon. I'm so appreciative of the opportunity for us to come together, representing different faiths and backgrounds, and in the ecumenical spirit of Vatican II and this great university, to mark Kristallnacht, a night of savagery and grotesque horror that presaged the Holocaust, the Shoah. Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor whose name adorns one of the buildings here on campus, famously remarked, "The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference." Your presence here today shows your commitment to rejecting indifference. So I thank you. It means a great deal to me, a great deal to the Jewish community for all of you to gather here today, and again for Sacred Heart to host us for this beautiful, beautiful opportunity to come together as people of different faiths, different backgrounds, different creeds, to stand against Kristallnacht, to stand against the Holocaust. And I want to invite you to be inspired by the music and the reflections we're going to hear, by the powerful words of our esteemed guest, Rabbi Skorka, and to internalize the mantra of never again, so that genocide can never again be perpetrated against any group or people. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kara Kilgallen from the Department of Languages and Literature, English and Foreign Language, and this is a reading called Shema by Primo Levi. You who live secure in your warm houses, who return at evening to find hot food and friendly faces, consider whether this, a man who labors in the mud, who knows no peace, who fights for a crust of bread, who dies at a yes or a no, consider whether this is a woman without hair or name, with no more strength to remember, eyes empty and womb cold, as a frog in winter. Consider this has been, I commend these words to you. Engrave them on your hearts when you are in the house, when you walk on your way, whether you go to bed, when you rise. Repeat them to your children, or may your house crumble, disease render you powerless, your offspring avert their faces from you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Kelly. I am the chair of the Department of Philosophy, Theology, and Religious Studies here at Sacred Heart. And I have the pleasure of introducing our featured speaker, Rabbi Skorka. When I was an undergrad pursuing a religious studies degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was in college, but courses in religion and philosophy and history, language, they interested me. So I indulged those interests, and if you indulge something long enough, you end up majoring in it. But anyway, I enrolled in a course on the history of Christianity taught by a man named Del Deschamps. And not far into this course, I was struck by the power of a worldview to embrace the other, to raise selfless action to the level of virtue, and to envisage a God who was passionately interested in human beings, in their search for meaning and for justice. Now, of course, Christianity inherits this ideal, and it's inextricably linked to its Jewish forebear. The heart of Christianity remains fundamentally Jewish. And then, some semesters later, I took another course from Del Deschamps. This was Judaism and Christianity after the Holocaust. And again, I was struck by the power of a worldview to ostracize, to dehumanize, and to maximize the efficiency of murder, to eradicate die Untermensch, those who didn't match some sort of Aryan ideal. I was suitably convinced that the single most pressing question for both Judaism and Christianity in the 20th and on into the 21st century was how to reconcile the events that unfolded under that Nazi regime. How ought one respond to injustice? Answers to that question run the gamut, right? From the mundane, how we interact with each other on a daily basis, to the extraordinary, which operates on national or international levels, shall we say. But somewhere in the middle, there are people like Abraham Skorka, people who offer us the possibility of dialogue, people who recognize the need for a continued, a sustained conversation for open communication. People who understand that shared nature of the human condition, that one of the giants from Christian theology once called a vast and terrible sea, which is oh so difficult to cross. Dialogue affords us something like a weapon of defense. We can mount a defense against elitism, especially in its most nefarious form, the kind of elitism that leads to extermination. Celebrated author, expert in rabbinic and biblical literature, holder of many prestigious positions, Dr. Skorka joins us today as an example of somebody who puts ethics into action. Somebody who continues to be committed to being seen and heard so that the past will not be forgotten and that the future remains hopeful. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Rabbi Abraham Skorka.
Good afternoon for everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to share my thoughts, my reflections on this 83rd anniversary of Kristallnacht. As time passes, the details of past events fade in our memories. The feelings and thoughts of the people involved become increasingly inaccessible to us. On the other hand, this distancing can bring new and broader perspectives into view. 83 years after the so-called Kristallnacht, we must consider its origins and meaning once more. The Nazi government of Germany, which had as one of its central programs the annihilation of the Jewish people, led its own people into a catastrophic war that consumed the lives of millions of its citizens. The Soviet Union entered into an infamous non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany that envisioned the immediate invasion and division of Poland. Today, the Soviet Union no longer exists. Japan had to give up its imperial dreams and was transformed with the help of its principal foe, the United States, into a technological and industrial powerhouse. Obviously, we are living today in a new reality. The Jewish people have sovereignty over the land of Israel. Germany once again raises the banners of democratic values. Different European peoples govern their own territories, Serbs, Croats, Lithuanians, etc. And nations in Africa and Asia have achieved independence from colonial powers. Power is now measured more and more in technological and economic terms, and the political hierarchy of nations is determined by zones of influence rather than colonization. In the light of all these developments, reflecting on the 83rd anniversary of Kristallnacht requires us to reinterpret the past and construct its meaning for our time. The great empires with their various alliances at the beginning of the century, led to the First World War. The Second World War was the consequence of the punitive Treaty of Versailles that had ended the, on quotation signs, war to end all wars, but which did nothing to curtail imperial rivalries or thoughts of vengeance. Nazi Germany launched to build a Reich that would last 1,000 years. Fascist Italy dreamed to restoring the glory of the Roman Empire, and Japan yearned for an empire of the rising sun. These unbridled desires led to millions of human death, the devastation of nations, and the weakening of biblical values and of the ideals of many religious traditions that aspire to elevate the human condition and promote human solidarity. Reflecting today on Nazi Judeophobia and the horrors committed during the Second World War demands that we keep in mind all the killings and cruelties that have been committed since. Anti-Semitism, while long-lived and leading to the unprecedented nightmarish mechanization of factories of death, is not an absolutely unique phenomenon. Kosovo, Darfur, Rwanda, and Cambodia are just a few of the places where human beings have since been dehumanized, as on that infamous night of November 9 to the 10, 1938, that marks the beginning of the Shoah. The lessons of the massacres of the Second World War have not been learned. The spiritual bankruptcy it exposes seems to have left people unable to revive and strengthen the values that bring about authentic civilization. At the root of the belligerence and the strict destructiveness of nations are the atavistic passions that lie in individual hearts and in the collective consciousness of people. These impulses can transform peaceful citizens into enraged hordes, or alternatively subjugate rationality to rampaging emotions. Sigmund Freud developed this theme in a letter addressed to Dr. Frederick van Eden on December 28, 1940, when analyzing the ravages of war in the first month of the First World War, and later in an exchange of letters with Albert Einstein, and in his essay, Civilization and its Discontents. Freud named these destructive forces thanatos, that which undermines the drive toward life, eros. There is something about Jewish life, values, and spirituality that agitates those in the clutches of thanatos. Perhaps the biblical verse that most roils such people is one of the last teachings of Moses in the book of Deuteronomy. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live. End of the quote from Deuteronomy 30:19. Anti-Semitism is not an isolated phenomenon. It is always part of a general crisis of values that a society is experiencing. One of the events that shook France and all of Europe in the late 19th century was the Dreyfus Affair. Within the nation that had proclaimed liberty, equality, and fraternity for all peoples, a large-scale anti-Semitic, xenophobic movement arose because of the situations of crisis it was experiencing. Threatening situations were enough for all the great ideals to be put aside and the dark atavisms, prejudices, and hatreds to surface again. As Maria de Gracia Caballos Bejano explains, the resurgence of racist sentiments was motivated in this period by different events. This period, I mean the end of the 19th century. The disaster of the 1870-71 war, which ended with the surrender at Sedan to the Prussians, the arrest of Napoleon III, and the disappearance of the Second Empire, the economic depression of 80s, caused, among other things, by the bankruptcy of the Union Generale, the Catholic Bank, the financial scandal of the construction of the Panama Canal, and the economic bankruptcy that led to the conviction of Ferdinand de Lesseps, his son, and the engineer Gustav Eiffel, as well as to the suicide of the financier Baron Jacques de Reinach, and the problems caused by the anarchist attacks of 1892, the French, at the end of the century, considered the Jews as the incarnation of evil and as the reason for the crises, scandals, and defeats that shook their society. End of the quote. From this, it seems clear that anti-Semitism appears especially in times of deep social crisis. But a second character, as occurred here in the United States, on the attacks that Jewish congregations suffered in Pittsburgh, close to San Diego. But a second characteristic, the one that allows its persistent reappearance, is the seed of anti-Jewish hatred that was first sown thousands of years ago and which has endured and challenged until only recently. The first precursor of Jew hatred appears in the Bible. In the text of the book of Esther, it emerged from the desire of power of one of the ministers of the king Ahasuerus of Persia, whose name was Aman, who wants everyone to prostrate themselves before him. Mordecai, Mark in English, a court Jew, refuses for religious reasons to comply with this demand. Haman responds with hatred for Mordecai, but since Mordecai's refusal was not personal but based on his convictions as a Jew, Haman projected his hatred of Mordecai onto all the Jewish people. It is worth observing that the speech Haman used to convince the king to annihilate all the Jews of Persia is strikingly similar to the Nazis' anti-Semitic propaganda of later centuries. The Jewish people had a unique vision among the peoples of antiquity. Their rejection of paganism and their belief in one God set them culturally apart from their neighbors. The maintenance of their religious and cultural identity required Jews to distinguish themselves from the surrounding population. The Jews exiled by Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon on 586 before this common era, who were the most cultured and significant in Judea at that time, not only did not assimilate into the local culture, but further developed their own identities and practices in response. The Talmud teaches that from then on, there was no more paganism in the bosom of Judea, which was eventually rebuilt by those who returned to Zion. Judaism endured throughout subsequently history thanks to the strategy adopted by these exiles, maintaining their own culture while resisting the appeal of assimilation. This set the pattern of Jewish life in diaspora even more. Christianity, which at first was a current within the heart of Judaism, grew into a movement that became widespread among Gentiles, while Jewish teachings and ethical norms became part of the lives of the former pagans, who rather quickly constituted the majority of church members. Jews and Christians turned into rival minorities in Roman society. When Christianity became the preferred imperial religion at the end of the 4th century, Christians gradually gained the power to completely subordinate their former rivals. The concept of a deicidal people, supposedly cursed by God for allegedly crucifying Jesus, took hold in medieval European Christendom. This demeaning image of the Jew is one of the factors that permitted the recurrence of hateful acts against Jews for centuries. Anti-Judaism could lie dormant for long periods of time, only to spring up in the times of crisis that make people seek out a scapegoat. Jews remained as minorities scattered throughout the countries of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. In places and times when minorities were respected, Jewish communities flourished. When intolerance and religious fanaticism arose, they fled, were expelled, or slain. During the 18th and 19th century, the concept of racial supremacy developed. It served as a justification for the barbaric colonization of Africa by European powers and the enslavement of people indigenous to or forcibly brought to the continents they colonized. These ideas were expressed by Arthur de Gobineau in an essay on the inequality of the human races, and by the very famous historian Ernst Renan in his Histoire générale et système comparé de langue sémitique. Such works inspired Houston Stewart Chamberlain, who wrote the foundations of the 19th century, a very famous anti-Semitic book. He wrote that, although he was born in England, he wrote that in German, and by the title, Die Grundlagen des 19. Jahrhunderts, which provided pseudo-scholarly underpinnings for the self-serving presumption that the predominant race had the right to direct the destinies of all the other inferior peoples. For example, in 1904, when German government committed the Herero and Namaqua genocides against the population of what was the German Southwest Africa, modern Namibia, British philosopher Houston Stewart Chamberlain congratulated Kaiser Wilhelm for his genocidal policies, praising him for his, on quotation signs, word of extermination, which was, on quotation signs, a fine example, the quotations are mine, of course, of how Aryans should deal with niggers, quotation signs. All of these antecedents paved the way for the National Socialist anti-Semitism championed by Adolf Hitler, which was only one of the consequences of the racialist worldview that permeated vast segments of European culture. Whatever one feels about the accuracy of Samuel Huntington's description of the post-Cold War world as a clash of civilizations, it is clear that we are living through many struggles between different cultures and religions. The religious factor in its fundamentalist expression began to be felt in the 7th decade of the last century, both in the internal conflicts of many countries as well as an international violence. Gilles Keppel deeply analyzed this phenomenon in his book, La Revanche de Dieu, The Revenge of God. It is in this context that today's anti-Semitism often manifests itself as anti-Zionism, which rejects the right of the Jewish people to rebuild its life as a nation in its ancestral home. Zionism is not only a national liberation movement, which it is, but is also a response to centuries of Jewish spiritual yearning for their homeland. One of its most important achievements was the revelation of Hebrew. The language of the prophets began to be a living language again after 2 millennia. The Jewish tradition in all its aspects served and serves as a source of inspiration for all aspects of life in the State of Israel. Importantly, the State of Israel began to be built in the late 19th century by pioneering Jews and by waves of immigration that follow in the first half of the 20th century. It is not a state created as a consequence of the Shoah, although it is a response to it. Tragically, the conflict with Palestinians remains unresolved, and efforts toward its total solution continue to face many huge obstacles. These include the influence of heinous political interests that can serve as an excuse for defamation and demonization, not only in the Middle East, but in violent acts and murders against Jews in far-flung parts of the world. This is another legacy of the history of anti-Semitism. Since the end of the Second World War, the smoke that emanated from the crematoriums of the extermination camps has disappeared. But the shadows of the chimneys of horror continue to fall on all humanity, confronting us regardless of our different beliefs, nationalities, and cultures. Will we impoverish the land to spread human misery, or will we fertilize it for the construction of a better world? Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cheryl Madison. I'm from the Department of Athletics. The reading I'm doing today is called Silence by Elie Wiesel. We begin with silence, the silence of death, the silence after destruction. There are times when songs falter, when darkness fills life, when martyrdom becomes a constellation of faith against the unrelieved black of space about us. There are no words to teach beyond the edge of night, no messenger to tell the full tale. There is only silence, the silence of Job, the silence of the 6 million, the silence of memory. Let us remember them as we link our silences.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jody Bortone, Associate Dean, College of Health Professions.
And I'm still Rabbi Josh Ratner. The Mourner's Kaddish is a memorial prayer that we say at the end of Jewish prayer services. Today we are going to accompany these sacred Aramaic words with the names of concentration camps and other sites of terror where 6 million Jews and millions of others perished in the Shoah, the Holocaust. Yitgadal,
Auschwitz,
V'yitkadash,
Lotz,
Shmei Rabbah,
Ponar,
Be'alma divra chiruteh,
Baba Yar,
V'yamlich machuteh,
Medinek,
B'chayachon uvyomechon,
Birkenau,
Uv'chayeh dechol Beit Yisrael,
Kovno,
V'agala v'zman kariv,
Janauska,
V'imru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lamei almaya. Yiparach v'yishtabach,
Terenstad,
v'yipa'ar v'yitromam,
Buchenwald,
v'yitnaseh v'yitadar,
Treblinka,
v'yitaleh v'yitalal,
Vilna,
Shmei Kudesha b'richu,
Bergen-Belsen,
le'elah,
Mauthausen,
minko b'chata v'shirata,
Dachau,
tush b'chata v'nechemata,
Minsk,
zamiran be'alma,
Warsaw.
v'imru, Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yishvei tevel v'imru, Amen.
Amen.
Before we end our service today, I'd like to extend a warm thank you to the students, staff, and faculty in attendance, and of course to our speaker, Rabbi Abraham Skorka, for sharing his thoughts and memories. This service is held annually as a moment of remembrance for the homes, schools, hospitals, and synagogues that were destroyed, and for the lives that were lost to the Nazi Party's atrocious violence both during Kristallnacht and the following years of World War II and the Holocaust. Our places of worship, our hospitals, our schools, and our homes are sacred spaces of change, of healing, of learning, and of peaceful living. I ask you all, as we approach another new and unknown year, to take time to reach out to everyone in those spaces with support, acceptance, and love. It is important now, more than ever, that we learn from our past and cherish moments to listen and learn from those people's experiences who differ from our own. We invite you all to join our reception in the narthex for refreshments and conversation as our service has ended. Once again, thank you for sharing your afternoon with us, and please have a lovely rest of your day and of your year. Thank you.